Well, after that introduction, first and foremost, thank you, Kerry, for putting on this conference and for sticking with it over 10 years. And we've been to Perth and we've done all sorts of things, and we've seen a lot of people from around the world coming along, recognising the importance of what Kerry is doing for the gold industry here in Australia. Also, thanks so much to the sponsors, Perth Mint, and all the other people who have come along and taken booths, and thank you very much for coming along as investors and people interested in what's going on. Now, the talk today is the renaissance in gold mining in Southeast Australia. So that's basically New South Wales and Victoria, and probably, as you know, that's where gold mining began. In New South Wales, essentially in 1850, and very soon after that in Victoria. So we've got some pretty interesting things to look at over time. So this renaissance in Southeast Australia is really decades of opportunity. Decades of opportunity. We need to look at the big picture and see what's happening. When we look at the past, we get an even better understanding of what the future will be. I'm a stockbroker, and I raise money for gold companies and those people who are interested in participating in some of these things. Please feel free to come along and talk to me after the meeting, over lunch or wherever. So I want to start with Australian gold production. Now, this history tells us a lot about Australia. And as I was saying, in the 1850s, gold was found at Oberon. A fellow named Hargraves likes to claim ownership of that, but he was a bit of a shyster, and some other people actually found that. He just took over and he got the reward. But soon after that, we started seeing gold production out of Victoria. And what we're going to see is the difference between the geology and the results of New South Wales versus Victoria, and really what that means for the future. So we had gold production really coming from Victoria here, and it declined into the 1890s, and this period we had Coolgardie and Kalgoorlie come in 1892 and 1893, and these were just spectacular results, which certainly changed the way Australia was viewed. Now, these are numbers in tonnes. So essentially 100 tonnes is just over 3 million ounces. Interesting, gold production peaked in about 1905, and there's some really interesting reasons for that. And then it declined essentially right through until the 1930s. Now, we know that the gold price was increased from $20.67 to $31 and then $35. And so we saw a brief run in the increase in gold production, but essentially because there wasn't enough money around, we didn't see much growth, and we also needed technological changes. By the time we got through to the 80s, when the gold price started to move higher, in 1980, the gold price on the 21st of January got up to $887.50 on that Monday morning, and Australia was producing less than 20 tonnes. Now, after that, the Australian mining industry, and I've been a great supporter of the entrepreneurial spirit, we went from 20 tonnes to 250 tonnes in about 7 years. An extraordinary achievement by the Australian Gold Index. And we got up to a high in 1997 of about 312 tonnes. We declined, and very interestingly, this period of decline into 2000, we actually saw Western Australian gold production fall 48% in that period. At the same time, the gold index went up by 700%, even though Western Australia gold production fell. And then we've seen the recovery, and now we're up to new highs. I think we're going to get up to 350 tonnes and we'll become the world's largest producer, because I don't believe that the Chinese are going to be able to maintain more than 400 tons. But that's interesting. So now, I've been looking at the gold index the gold industry for quite some years, and this was something which I did in 1995. Unfortunately, I don't have all the data, but this is the real gold price. Now, this is really, really fascinating because the gold might have been $20.67 in US dollars, but it was £4, 4 shillings and 10 pence halfpenny in sterling all through that time. And basically 4 sovereigns made up a guinea. And so this becomes interesting to see where it all comes together. But the fascinating thing is that we had a fixed gold price. Now, when we had inflation in Australia, the real gold price fell. When we had deflation, the real gold price rose. And so we actually saw that after the 1890s depression, when we saw a rise in the real gold price, we started to get inflation, and then gold production fell away very, very quickly. The wars came in sort of 1914, but by the time we got here, gold production was down 60% before the end of the gold production was down 65% before the First World War started. There was the revaluation, and this is the response to the real gold price. But I think it's just nice seeing that history. Now, when we look at, from the same report that I did some time ago, when we look at Victoria, these are on the same scale. Victoria was very, very important, very, very large. Western Australia came much, much later, but it wasn't as big as the alluvial discoveries and alluvial output there in Victoria. And New South Wales was really quite modest all the way through. Now, remember, we're talking about the renaissance of gold in southeast Australia, but what that really says is Victoria has been the big kid on the block, and it's going to be the big kid in the block. In the shorter term, this is quarterly gold production from Australia. You can see that we're on our way to 330 tonnes, and I think we'll get to 350. See how much Western Australia declined, and they're moving up nicely. But it's the new guys on the block that are coming through. Now, this is also important. This is the exploration dollars. They might not be at new highs in real terms, but what's happening is that exploration is really strongly underway. And what we find is that the finding costs are about $70 an ounce. So if we're doing $1 billion a year, we should be finding about 14 million ounces a year. Now, that will probably only turn into maybe 500,000 ounces in future mines, but the activity is increasing. Now, when we look at the share of gold production in Australia and who's doing what, this is New South Wales, and you can see how it's grown quite substantially, and it's up to 40 tonnes a year. And this is Victoria, and this is Kirkland Lake's Fosterville mine. These are really important things. So this renaissance is underway in southeast Australia. What we see in New South Wales is the effect of Cadia and Cowell, but in Victoria we've got a very important growth there from Fosterville. In terms of shares, New South Wales is about 13%, and Victoria's moved up to 6 or 7%. So this becomes really important in understanding the dynamics of where we're going in the future. Now, I've got this, which I've got from someone. I'm sorry I can't give you the source, but what's important is that in the world, the Witwatersrand is by far and away the biggest gold deposit. It's about 100,000 tonnes of endowment, and there's been about 55,000 tonnes of that's produced. We've probably got 35 to 40,000 tonnes of resources and more that will probably never be mined. But these put all the major gold fields into one scale. So the Yilgarn, we've got the Witwatersrand, then we've got the Birimian in West Africa, and people will be talking about the Birimian. Then we've got the Carlin Trend in Nevada. The Birimian's about 10,000 tonnes, Carlin's about 8,000 tonnes, the Yilgarn's just under 8,000 tonnes, Victoria is about 6,000 tonnes, and the Witwatersrand is 100,000 tonnes. But these are the big deposits and endowments of gold, and they're all the same size, so there's just extraordinary opportunity when I look at this for new gold discoveries to be made in these fields. Now, the other thing that's important is to think of the scale of what things in Southeast Australia are like. Now, this takes the Bendigo field. This is from Catalyst. They talk about the size of the Bendigo field against the Kalgoorlie super pit. These things are quite massive. And remember that these things aren't producing anything at the moment, and Kalgoorlie produces around about 800,000 ounces a year. So let's look at gold production, and it comes down to really two key mines. The first one is Newcrest's Cadia East, and now that's a porphyry copper, and then that produces 800,000 to 900,000 ounces a year, and then Fosterville, which is doing 600,000 ounces. The difference in the grades is extraordinary, and I'll get that to that at a moment. We've got North Parks, and we've also got Cowell, but they're nothing like those two big mines. But what's happening is that we're seeing a real renaissance in geological understanding. All the geological surveys of New South Wales and Victoria have done a huge amount of work in the theoretical understanding of how gold occurs and where it might occur. And the other important thing is that we've got rising expenditures, and you'll see all the different players that are coming in. Now, New South Wales, a lot of gold occurrences. There's a lot of gold. Unfortunately for us, most of these things are fairly small, but they do lead to much, much bigger things. And if we break that area into some regions, and we'll exclude Broken Hill because the gold is really associated with the lead zinc, but this is all the Macquarie Arc and associated geological activity from Ordovician, Silurian Island arcs. I'll talk about that a bit more, and we've got some stuff in the New England. So we've got in the Macquarie Arc, we've got Cadia, we've got Cowell, North Parks, Tomingley, McPhillamys. These are all significant things. We've got the Cobar Basin and New England. The Macquarie Arc is essentially around here. This changes with interpretation, but it's all about the island arcs, the volcanic activity which has taken place, and the sediments that have been pushed around as we've had the island arcs compressed by plate tectonics. So in New South Wales, in the Macquarie Arc, we've got Newcrest, we've got CMOC, we've got Evolution, Fortescue. Fortescue is there looking around Cadia. We've got Regis has come in, we've got Alliance, we've got Godolphin, Alice Queen, Golden Cross. I've got Alice Queen twice. Magnetic Resources and Silver Mines. All these things have got some really interesting things happening at the moment. Now, it's really fascinating, two states and two geological surveys, two different sets of geologies, and two different ways of looking at it. In New South Wales, the focus is really on rock type. And the big deposits have been copper gold, like Cadia and North Parks, or epithermal types like Cowell. And we're getting some of the this copper gold in that Dalwhinnie zone that Jay Klein spoke about this morning. Now Cadia is a monster, absolute monster, but it's hard to find. North Parkes is nowhere near as big as this, but and the others are smaller so far. We've got issues of being able to drill undercover and remote sensing and land access, but it's more difficult, and as we'll see. Now, these are the last few years of gold production from Cadia. You can see it did 900,000 ounces in the year just past. It'll do a bit more, and then it will start to decline. But it's a big producer, and it's Australia's biggest mine at the moment. It's bigger than the Super Pit, and it's bigger than Boddington. So we've got that in New South Wales. People in New South Wales or Sydney might not realise that New South Wales is a mining state, and we've got the biggest gold mine. So you need to keep that in mind. Now, Lake Cowell, or Cowell, it's chugging along nicely. This will move up to 300,000 ounces as we go through the next years. So they're the two important players. Now, looking at New South Wales, we've got a lot of little players, and the tenements are quite fragmented, but some of them are really quite juicy and very exciting, as we've seen from Alkane with its Boda Kaiser discovery. It looks very much like Cadia, but they've got some activity at Tomingley, and they're looking at 2 or 3 million ounces along here. These are relatively small tenements compared to what we'll see in Victoria. Now, this Kaiser Boda intrusive is really very interesting. I know the guys are very excited, so make sure you talk to the people from Alkane, Ian Chalmers, and it's a very exciting deposit, and hopefully that might lead to something like Cadia. We've got magmatic resources. It's got a few small tenements. Godolphin, it's got a number of tenements along the Godolphin Fault, with McPhillips up the way to Copper Hill. This is a very interesting area in my view, and these are the sorts of companies I think that are going to provide excellent returns as they carry out their activities, and we see a higher gold price. So for New South Wales, the focus is on the Macquarie Arc. They're primarily copper-gold porphyries. They're really big company games, and so the smaller companies have to be project generators. That is, people who go out, get a project, upgrade it, make it attractive, and get someone else to come and spend the money. But definitely we're seeing an increase in activity. Now, looking at Bendigo, it's a history of big deposits. Bendigo, 22 million ounces, Ballarat, 16, Fosterville, 8.6 and growing, Castlemaine, 5.6. Now, interestingly, the Bendigo's mostly hard rock, Ballarat's a little less hard rock and more alluvial. This is all hard rock. Castlemaine is about 85% alluvials, and they haven't really, they're not on top of really where the hard rock is. And Stawell's 3.5 million ounces. So these are really quite big. They're quite big deposits. When we look at Victorian geology, we talked about New South Wales. They look at the rock types. When in Victoria, you look at the structure, and the work that they've done on the history, the geological history of these areas is really quite remarkable. There's a fellow named Ross Cayley, who's in the Geological Survey of Victoria. He's done some absolutely wonderful work in understanding the history. But some interesting things here. We're about 180,000 tonnes at the moment. Victoria, 2,500 tonnes. That's 1.5% of all the world's gold and 0.15% of the world's land area. And productive. So basically, it says that the geology is 100 times richer than the global average. So this is really, really important. There are a number of areas like the Bendigo zone and the Melbourne zone and the Stawell zone and so on, and they're important for geological structural reasons because there's a lot of big faults. These are in the same Ordovician 400 million year old rocks with some Silurians, and it's fascinating the way that this all develops. So the focus is on structure. It's a very complex geological history, and much more so than New South Wales. Very large alluvial content, and there's a lot of cover. The Murray Basin sediment cover is important. And it's grossly underexplored, and very, very little deep exploration. And these things make great opportunities for the players who are there now. So we talked about the cover, the Murray Basin cover. This is up from 5 metres to 100 metres. And so we've got a continuation of all this Silurian and Ordovician geology going underneath that. This is from Catalyst. It basically shows where we've got Bendigo, Ballarat Bendigo, we've got Fosterville, and 60 million ounces production, and the mines department predicts over 30 million. I think they're probably going to say more now, given what's happened with Fosterville. So this is the production history of Ballarat and Bendigo. You can see the strong growth, and then steady production for the next. That's until 1920. Now, we talked about all these structures. These structures are really important. This is the source of the fluids, and depends where we end up in the various rock types. And it's more structural work than rock type, as we have in New South Wales. And this is the Murray Basin cover. Now, we talked about Fosterville. Look at this extraordinary growth in the reserves, and this is the grade. So we've gone 490 at 9.8, a million, 1.7, 2.7 at 31 grams. I mean, this is the sort of ore body that an exploration geologist dreams of, hopes he can find it. But when you can see what it's been producing, 100,000 ounces, 150, 260, 350, and we're looking at 600,000 ounces. And if you saw the numbers from them yesterday, they did 158,000 ounces in the quarter at 41 grams. And I think I saw the costs were $128 an ounce. So the amount of money that's being generated by Fosterville is enormous. Now, when we start looking at the individual players who are in Victoria, Catalyst here has got quite a massive spread of tenements, in great contrast to New South Wales. So the players here have got big tenements, and they've also cashed up, so things are going to happen. If we look at Chalice, it's got big tenements. So it's got a lot of cash, and it's going to be spending it. So you can invest in these things with reasonable confidence that they're going to find something, because there's so little work that's been done previously, and you know that they're not going to be coming back to the market every week for more money. If Kalamazoo, it's got large tenements looking at Malden, St Muckleford, and Castlemaine, including the old Wattle Gully mine. So as you can see from all these other players, big tenements, and it makes it very, very interesting. Wattle Gully produced 400,000 ounces, but there's next to nothing has been done in these areas. Next to nothing has been done along strike for these projects. So the guys have got the money, they're starting to do things. The technology we've got today is reducing risk, so it's going to be pretty exciting. Navarre is looking around Stawell and Ararat, as well as its joint venture with Catalyst. So for the Victorian goldfields, we've got structural geology focus, a really large historical alluvial component, large deposits, underexplored, and there's a real acceleration of activity underway now. And the guys are well funded. So South Australian output is going to grow further. Expects a substantial re-rating of Victoria. New South Wales will provide intrigue from the Alkanes and the Alice Queens and the people who are following those porphyry coppers, because they're a large prize, but we're really only just starting. If you look at the long term, if you go back to 1850 to see what sort of production came from those fields, how quickly it came, and the fact that there's been next to nothing since 1920, just shows the potential. At the time I did that report in about 1995, I looked at the gold production from first production to 1920 for all these gold fields throughout Australia, and then looked at the increase in gold production up until 1995. Generally speaking, the West Australian gold fields were providing about 3 times the gold that was mined pre-1920. And these Victorian things haven't really been mined since 1920. And they've been large deposits. I think we're going to find a multiple of what's been found previously. So it's only just starting. Now, I'm very happy to take any questions that people might have. I've got a few minutes. Yes, sir. Yes, I think regulatory challenges are right. The geology is very, very different. I spent a lot of time looking at the Yilgarn in Western Australia, and I used to say, well, most of those deposits are similar. As we go through time, we find that they're not, but they're similar. But when we go to the east and when we go to Queensland, almost every deposit is different. Mount Lation is different to Kidston. Different to Charters Towers, different to Ravenswood. So the geology there is different. The activity, I think, is nowhere near as attractive as what we see in Victoria or parts of New South Wales. But over time, it will come. It will come to every state. It'll come to South Australia and Northern Territory. But just as I see things, Southeast Australia is going to be more exciting. Well, because Fosterville is new, and we sort of haven't found one of those before, it's very hard to say. But I think from what I have seen, I think every one of those companies, whether we're talking about Catalyst or Kalamazoo or Chalice or Navarre, has got a very real chance of finding something like that, because Fosterville, as far as I can understand it, is a later event to most of the gold that's there that's been mined previously in Fosterville prior to the discovery of the Swan Zone. I think they've all got a good chance. They've got money now, and they've got new technology, and I think people will be standing up and really looking at Victoria. Anything else? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Barry. Do you have an opinion on cut-off grades? We have some of our presenters have had, say, hundreds of thousands of tons at, say, 1-point-something grams low grade. And in that low grade environment, do you see any, do they still do heap leaching in those low grades?
Well, the thing to keep in mind is that at the moment, 1 gram is equal to about $70 a gram. Now, half a gram's $35. You can make money at half a gram. And the bigger the mine is, the lower grades. And there's some really interesting technologies coming in that are allowing us to treat larger volumes of lower and lower grades and cutting the costs to some degree. You've got to keep in mind that as the gold price goes up, you find that your resources can increase quite dramatically with even a small reduction in your cut-off grade, depending on the continuity of the mineralisation. So we don't need to worry about cut-off grades at these sorts of prices. That's a decision that the companies will make. You can take the Jake Klein view of only doing things that are going to give that are shareholder accretive, or you can look at things on a margin basis that some of the other companies do. But the cut-off grades are very important. We saw with Kairos that reducing the cut-off grade increases the size of the pit shell, because that's that style of mineralisation that will allow that. I'm sorry, say that again? Well, it's my view, and it might not be right, that I'm just looking at China, because I think they're well under 400 tonnes now, and I think we'll get up to 350 tonnes, and I think we'll pass them when they're going down, and we're on the way up. That's what I think. Now, it might not be that, but I've great faith in the Australian mining industry to increase output. And what we saw from 1982 to 1990 was just fabulous. It shows the entrepreneurial spirit of the mining industry. Yep. Yep. If one's coming down, one's going up. It's very quick. But we've got to look at West Africa. The Birimian is coming up very, very quickly. Anyway, that's probably enough for me. Thank you very much. Now, our next speaker is Carl Schonbohm from his company secretary of DGR Global. Now, this company is very interesting in the sense that it's a holding company, and it's got investments in a diverse range of commodities in a diverse range of operational jurisdictions. And it's a really interesting story, and there's great value there. Carl?